Hello, sir. This is my assignment, Popplet on behavioral learning. And I guess I'll just go right into it. So we're going to be going into behaviorism, which can be split into two different theories. The first one I'm going to go into is association theory. So association theory is based on really very different characteristics. So it really talks about automatic or reflexive responses. So that being said, is basically a stimulus that is giving. It's basically the natural response that is already the natural behavior of the subject, whether if it's an animal or a person. It's just a natural behavior, their natural response to a certain stimulus. A neutral stimulus, basically any stimulus that doesn't really give off a response from the subject. It could be a bell ring, it could be a smell, it could be a certain color. It just doesn't really affect the subject. And then from automatic or reflexive responses, we go into below the level of conscious awareness. It's basically involuntary actions such as your saliva, such as your heartbeat, your breathing. It just kind of happens without you really having to do anything. Your body just takes care of it. Same as behavior, just kind of like it's the natural behavior of it. From neutral stimulus, we split off into two different categories: conditional stimulus and unconditional stimulus. I'm going to go into unconditional stimulus first. An unconditional stimulus is basically anything that harbors or results anything. So let's say a certain smell. A certain smell just makes your mouth water. Maybe it's your favorite food. The result will be that your mouth waters and you're expecting from that great smell. Your result is being that you're salivating for the food. That would go into unconditional response, is the current result of the stimulus. So the unconditional response is your salivation, that you're basically you're craving the food, you unconditionally want it because from the stimulus. And then from there, going into conditional stimulus, you get neutral. The way this works is basically you're trying to condition a new response from a new stimulus. And the way this works is basically you take the neutral stimulus, the stimulus that doesn't really engage in responses, and the unconditional stimulus, which will engage a conditional response. So that being said, like if you have the smell, you salivate. But if you ring the bell, you don't salivate. But if you can engage the two, if you ring the bell and bring in the certain smell or the certain food, that's when you start salivating, and you start ringing the bell every time before you bring the food. You're going to harbor a new behavior. So eventually, when you ring the bell, naturally you're going to start thinking that the food is coming, whether the food is there in front of you or not. So if you would ring it, you would start salivating. And so that would be the new response without the unconditional stimulus. The conditional response would be that you salivate when there's the ring of the bell with the food or the smell. And then the new response would be without the stimulus, without the food. If you ring the bell, the person will start salivating, or the animal will start salivating. Okay. That would conclude all about association theory. So I would go into the reinforcement theory. The reinforcement theory was something that was brought up about a little over 100 years ago. And it was brought up by both Edward L. Thorndike. He was the first one to really introduce it, but B.F. Skinner was the one to really expand on it and make it a popular theory. And that would be operant conditioning. Basically, operant conditioning would discuss having reinforcements for behavior that you want and don't want. So B.F. Skinner expanded on this by an experiment that he had. He used experimental chambers known as Skinner boxes, where he used pigeons, and he would engage like certain little different reinforcements and negative reinforcements in order to harbor a behavior that he liked, or to get rid of a behavior that from the pigeons that he didn't like. So from the Skinner boxes, he would use positive and negative reinforcements. Positive and negative reinforcements would basically mean that he would either add a reinforcement, basically being a positive, or removing a reinforcement, being a negative. Like that would be the negative reinforcement. So basically saying, like, if they're doing a behavior that he likes, if he's doing the behavior that they don't like, he would add something to he would add a stimulus in order to get rid of it, or he would take away a stimulus in order to stop it as well. Positive and negative punishment. So basically, positive punishment would be adding an unpleasant stimulus, such as shouting, or such as maybe a little shock, or taking away food, or taking away something pleasure, like from a child. If they're not doing what you want, a positive reinforcement would be to add something, basically meaning adding more chores, or making them making them go to the room, making them do something. Taking away negative punishment, basically you're taking away the TV, you're taking away their favorite candy, you're taking away their free time, you're taking away their video games. That would be negative, taking it away. All right, and from there we have the two different terms, appetitive and aversive. Appetitive is basically pleasing or rewarding, which would come from positive reinforcement and mainly positive reinforcement. And then aversive is unrewarded or unwanted, basically would be a positive punishment or a negative reinforcement. That would be the aversive. And then we have 4 different time schedules, really. So it could go, there's different times where adding the stimulus was recorded, and there was 4 different ones. There's fixed ratio schedule, variable ratio schedule, fixed interval schedule, and variable interval schedule. So the fixed ratio schedule was basically a fixed time where the stimulus was given. It didn't matter how many times the response was given, the certain responses they wanted. It would still, let's say every 5 minutes he would add a piece of food to the cage of the pigeon for wanting the pigeon to stand up on a little ledge. It didn't matter how many times the pigeon would stand up on the ledge. If it was every 5 minutes, he would only give him the food every 5 minutes. Variable ratio schedule is basically the opposite of that. Stimulus would be given, let's say, a course of a week. Within the course of a week, he's giving them either more in 1 week or less in 1 week to see how the responses would engage that. It's basically just a different time variable. And then fixed interval schedule. The fixed interval schedule is basically a stimulus given after a fixed time elapses. So the stimulus is given after the time elapses. And then for variable interval schedule is a stimulus given after a varied amount of time. So it doesn't matter how much time happened in between, or how many, he would still give it just at random times. So this will conclude my behavioral learning Popplet. I hope you enjoyed it, and please let me know of any ways I can make it better. Thank you very much.